The title of this evening's Dharma talk is Talking At. Came up in an interview recently with someone by the name of Pure Appearance. They knew who they are. And it's something we all experience all the time. We have a conversation, we're listening to someone, talking to someone, trying to have a conversation, or maybe not. Maybe we're just in our house, wandering around, or in our kitchen. Maybe we're at the place that we work, and whatever it may be, it could be in here, and we find it's the most recognizable when someone's doing that to us, talking at us. And it's kind of you could say one-sided. Someone's telling us about this and about us, and there's no opening. There's no, say, call and response. There's no talking about it, discussing it together. The mutuality tends to get sucked out of it by could be anyone, several things. Pride. Someone's really puffed up about what they know, what they think. Or maybe you might notice after you've been talking to someone for a while that you've been just talking at them. More about just, as it's sometimes said, just wanting to hear the sound of your own voice somehow. So it's just an active form of ignorance. Still ignorance. It's still one of the three poisons. The most difficult one to see is the very nature of this particular poison of the three: passion, aggression, ignorance. Ignorance is just the very nature of ignorance. It's probably the last one that will show up. Sometimes we notice that we've been ignoring. We notice there's kind of a gap in something. It might be that you noticed, you might not use this word, that you were just talking at someone. You didn't really receive. You may not have even said, well, how are you doing? How are things going for you? Something simple like that. And quite often the self-centeredness, the manifestation of me, and my stuff, my ideas, my territoriality, my rules, my opinions, my ideas, my me. Sometimes that feels so natural. It just feels we're just expressing ourselves. People who don't train their minds at all don't have trained minds. They don't have the awareness that actually tracks what they're saying. If your awareness is sharp, you will be in charge of your own grammar or lack thereof. It won't escape you if someone says something to you and you say, oh, right. You won't miss that. You might continue to say it. That's what I call a phrase filler, something I invented. I think I probably stole it from Picasso. I'm lying. I didn't steal it from him. I borrowed it. A phrase filler is something that comes in. It's not something necessarily we're doing deliberately. It's something that we do to keep the awareness from actually being responsible. The ability to respond to what is happening. The ability to be in touch with whatever is coming and going. The territoriality is what we misunderstand. We think our thoughts are ours and somebody else's thoughts is theirs. This is the very nature of ignorance, is to think that we own our thoughts, we are our thoughts. This doesn't mean you're not responsible, but here's the part that makes it so difficult. You're responsible for other people's thoughts. You can't really get out of this by saying, well, he said, well, they did. Sometimes people will even do machine gun responses, like, right. You heard that before? Well, I'm just saying that I like my favorite color is pink, right? Probably isn't pink. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, bring through the sitting practice of meditation, your awareness will get stronger and stronger. If you think it's getting stronger, it's a misunderstanding. It's It's not getting stronger in the sense that you're aware that you're more aware. This doesn't work. You can't be aware that you're more aware. This is the self-centeredness. This is the narcissism that is on the loose in just about every human being you meet. Not wrong. Nothing to fix. It's just the nature of dependent origination. It's the nature of relative truth. That this happens and that happens, and this happens and that happens. And that's a simple statement there. You can't actually state what it is because it is vast and numberless. So what is it about? I'll tell you. Since you're here, you give me permission to tell you stuff, and I intend to do it. Right? It's a phrase filler. It's like, see what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Follow me? I do it myself. That's how I know about it. I do it all the time. Usually I don't notice it until right after I've done that. And of course, what follows out on the heels of that is, well, you find out. You don't need my testament about anything. The singularity, the actual singularity, is very, very difficult to see. It's not actually a discovery. It's more of an uncovery. We have to actually see what separation is in order to understand what no separation is. In order to see the fundamental, to use the fancy positive word, unity of everything, it is necessary to look deeply into the differences, into the contrasts, and into the rough edges around everything, especially your own emotions, reactions, and so on. It's difficult to track if you're with someone who your chemistry, your wavelength, and their chemistry, their wavelength, are very similar and are bouncing off from each other. It doesn't actually become, it becomes a kind of give and take where the awareness is at a very low volume. So it's not about stopping that. It's not about being someone who never uses a phrase filler, or someone who never has a conversation where they're not talking at. All talking at is saying, the very word that you can see it yourself, is that you're objectifying somebody. They're just somebody to receive what you have to say. It's a reenactment on stage, the stage of your self-centeredness, of the way ego functions. You can't function as an ego unless you have an other. And the ultimate teaching of the Buddha, as it is presented here, is everything. Oh, there she is. You moved. I always watch when Michelle moves. Empty of other, not just the emptiness of the second turning of the teachings of the Buddha, as everything is empty of our imputation, our ideas, our projections, our fabrications, and our evaluations about things. Anytime you look at what you think about something, you've just abandoned the very wisdom mind that 3 seconds ago was looking at reality. Everybody is happening to everyone, everywhere, all the time. Wisdom of the Buddha, the awakened one, or awakening itself. Forget about Buddhism, if you can. The clarity itself is your birthright. It's already the case. But hope and fear cloud it over and stop it, and they've been doing it for lifetimes. They've been doing it for days, months, years. You don't have to stop it. You don't have to change it. You don't have to train yourself into some kind of a magical person who no longer has any issues or problems. That's actually called the God realm. But you could train yourself very clearly to notice when you start to talk at someone. Sometimes the only way you can fundamentally see it is to see someone do it to you. And then you can, as soon as you see someone do that to you, talk at you, in other words, be disrespectful, just try to fill you up with their ideas and their opinions, which may have a great, even logical basis to it. Quite often when someone does that to us, if we're clear, we have some clarity, maybe we're not enlightened particularly, we have some clarity, we don't immediately go and accuse them in our own mind of being disrespectful, even though that's what they're doing. What we might see is that how much they're suffering. And this is why we're all doing this. We turn away from the difficulty and blame, turn away from the difficulty and express ourselves. I just have to be me, kind of thing. So what is it about? It's about seeing that very clearly. If you see it very clearly, you won't have to make any adjustments at all. We have to start out by making adjustments if you're going to practice this way of understanding. And that thing that we have to do is to interrupt the daily up and down, back and forth, this way, that way, awake and asleep, and eating and not eating, interacting and not interacting. Interrupt that whole, circularity, and sit down, hold still, face the wall, and watch what continues to move when everything else is stopped. Because we have a relative understanding that we've actually stopped everything. Look closely for a few years, few days, few months. Look closely, just watch the movement. If you start to come to conclusions, just watch the movement of a conclusion. Don't stop that. Don't try to create necessarily. Don't try to create a mind that is clear, a mind that is peace. This is horse manure, basically. No disrespect to the equestrians. But it's just waste. It's just a waste to do that, because it gives the self-centered mind, the ego mind, a feeling of accomplishing something. Well, at least I'm getting somewhere. If you ever say to yourself, well, at least, you should stop right there. Or keep going. It's not about being successful and kind of understanding what this is. That's a lower level of prajna or wisdom. It's the relative wisdom of seeing the dynamics between this and that, between light and dark, between good and evil, if you wanted to go that direction, between life and death. Those polarities need each other. You can't have life without death. You can't have wisdom without ignorance. You can't have sentient beings without Buddhas. So it seems to be necessary just to observe the way that's working. And your wisdom mind, which is, as I said before, is your birthright. You already have it. You don't have to fix anything. This doesn't mean you might not be very unhappy, but that's a relative situation. Once you see that happiness and unhappiness are just need I say more? They go back and forth, and pretty happy, and then pretty sad, and then pretty miserable, and then feeling pretty good today. That all happens in the wisdom mind, and the wisdom mind doesn't do anything. It doesn't even notice it. You can only notice something you're separate from. There will come a time, perhaps, when there won't be anything else. It might have lots of facets to it, but it's just one big ball in the middle of the mirror ball in the middle of the ballroom. Who knows? I made one of those once with little tiny mirrors. No, I didn't. I didn't do that. I thought about it, though. I thought about doing it, but I didn't do it. So again, coming back to the same theme that I talk about over and over again, it is about being aware of what's happening, not fixing what's happening. If you go in with hammer and tong, I don't care whether it's any tool, you may get some relative truth, some relative accomplishment out of it. But anything created, all compounded things are going down. Anything put together, I don't care if it's sanity. I don't care if it's kindness. I don't care if it's compassion. Anything that is created will come apart. It's just the nature of relative truth. But your Buddha nature is vast, unfindable, unsearchable, undiscoverable, and is beyond everything. So how would you even know about it? You won't. But you can stop objecting to it by buying into right and wrong and up and down and back and forth. Don't do it. Stop it. And how do you do it? You see the way your mind keeps jumping to conclusions about everything with the help of the nerve endings, with the help of the causes and conditions that you've been thrown down into or maybe downloaded into, because this is like a big school. The only way the Buddha comes here is in the form of a bodhisattva, in the form of someone who comes here just to help others. Questions are good if you have them. Shoro.
If we can't know who we are, then what's realized in realization?
You find out who you're not. Yes.
Does that look like one relative
Yeah, keep going.
loss after another?
I thought you were headed for it, but you missed it. Somewhat. We could show up like that, but there's no protocol for it. It needs to be that way each time. More. Ishikai.
When you say everywhere you look, you're looking at yourself, what?
Did I say that?
I've heard you say it. What are
Good
you?
memory.
What are you referring to when you say yourself?
I don't see anything else. There isn't anything else. There's kind of an elseness, elsenosity, is that a word? There's something like that, but you don't believe it, and nor do you disbelieve it. Disbelief is a more powerful kind of belief, thinking something's not true. Excuse me. That plays right into the hands of, assuming it has hands, to self-centeredness and ego. Well, I don't believe that. What do I mean by that? Belief and disbelief. And the other one is, what's the third one? Yes. So I believe it. Yeah, that's true. That's what's happening. I disbelieve it. I don't believe it. And then avoiding distracting yourself from the entire polarity that was in front of you 30 seconds ago. More?
Do we have to disbelieve the self at some point to see through it after believing it?
I think we flash on that somewhat, but the idea, the misunderstanding that quite often happens with meditators and with people on spiritual paths is they think if they start to get some insight into something, in the Zen tradition, this is called kensho, or insight into your true nature. It's temporary because we tend to think, I think I'm onto something. You're not. And if you think that you are, you'll grasp something, and then the very experience, because we think we value the experience. It's just a lower level of understanding. And we don't want to devalue it either. Just whatever happens, the way I often say, just include whatever happens. Check no passports. Just include. Everything gets to go. And the ego mind, of course, will turn that around and say, well, yeah, but what about these guys? Or what about this kind of emotion? Are you saying you're justifying anger? Or you're justifying someone? You're always going to find some kind of deviating from that, some kind of squeeze, some kind of separation out of it, where somebody's right and somebody's wrong. It's a misunderstanding. It's an incredibly deep, powerful misunderstanding based on fear. And so there are lots of ways to do this. You can, what they say, clean up your act, do 30 hours of transactional analysis every day. I don't think there's that many hours in a day, but eventually you're going to be transactionally orientationated to whatever's, you're going to see that okay and okay. Whew. That's over with. Now I can go on and live my life and put my head back in that potted plant. More?
Is the endeavor to be more aware coming at our life with hammer and tong, or I forget what you said?
I don't think so. Yeah, hammer and sickle. I don't think so. I think a little bit. It's that's why Buddhism is often called the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. Do some, but don't. Some traditions get very, very macho and aggressive about making sure nobody wiggles, and they yell at you if you're sitting in a certain organization. So you can't move. So a little bit of movement, but not so much that the whole shebang collapses. So that's why we have a schedule here. You come, you sit, practice. The gong rings, you get up and go weed the garden or something. So the intention to be more aware and more clear, certainly necessary. The very path of the bodhisattva, or the enlightening being, is a bodhicitta, or the mind awakening. Someone who has had some kind of a glimpse of what this could be, that one could actually live in a dimension that, and it's not actually a dimension, but we have to say something about it. So we're going to use that word. I'm going to use that word in such a way that there's not separate from anything. Not if it's time to separate, you separate. If it's time to come together, you come together. You're no longer perplexed by boundaries, or even to take that further, or you're not perplexed by ethics. You completely understand boundary. You don't need a rule. You understand the boundary. So therefore, and you notice that all boundaries are shifting all the time. The very nature, if it didn't shift, it would just be there indefinitely, and you wouldn't even know it was there, because it'd be like fire. Fire's hot. You know about that? You never get water and fire confused unless it's steam. More? Less? There's more room for questions there. In that area we're talking about, or I'm talking about.
You're kind of saying that to go at something with improvement mentality, like kindness, for example. So how is that different than awareness? Or what's the difference between those two?
So as I say over and over, we have to start somewhere. So you could start out just relatively giving people a break, listening to what they're saying. Even though what they're saying sounds a little crazy, or it sounds like they're talking at you, listen to them. Don't point out that they're talking at you. Not a good idea. Unless I'm there. Which in your case, I'm always there. No? Yes? No? Yes? No? So what was the question?
Working on kindness versus working on awareness.
I think that sitting meditation is you're working on awareness. So in other words, you're watching, you're holding it, you're in this body, mind are not two different things. They just look like it. So you find what you do have say-so about with no warfare, hold the body very still, sit in a symmetrical posture, because symmetry has a kind of natural balance. Hold very still, sit there for hours at a time. This doesn't mean that you aren't aware of your back hurts, then stretch your back, or like I talk about it all the time. No macho militant stuff. That doesn't work. But sit to as long as you can, and shift a little bit, and then return. Keep returning to stillness over and over. And then that's the awareness. That's just receiving. Just give everything your attention. Whatever's moving, the birds outside the monastery, the cars, the backfire down the North Avenue. Just give it your attention and don't add. No math at all. If something arises, treat it. You could take an attitude towards it where you have no idea what it even is. You're just aware of the qualities at the leading edge of each one of the six sense fields, including the mind. If you think what you know what you're thinking, then this is a misunderstanding. That's the beginning of ignorance. That's the first second of the 12 links on the chain of existence. Ignorance and formations. So then, what was the other part of it? Awareness and kindness. So kindness, when you get up off the cushion, not that there isn't some kindness on the cushion, you're giving yourself a break. You're being kind to yourself by unplugging your food processor mind from the relative world around you, all the things that are going on. Just unplug, sit down, hold still, watch all the junk fall to the bottom. It may take a few years before that happens. And that metaphor may not even work for you. But something slows down. Some kind of speediness slows down. When you get up off the cushion, then be kind to people. Not based on you trying to be a kind person, not based on trying to make sure everybody thinks you're a kind person, not based on having any idea of whether you're being kind. No basis, no reference point for it. If you do that, then instead of up here where all the paranoia is, or down here where all the fear is, come out of this. You can. This actually doesn't think; it knows. When I say it, it's not even an it. Always lead with this, and that's what's tied to the breath, like that. Always lead with this. And how do you know we're leading with this? Because you're probably going to be afraid quite a bit of the time until this is transcended. And then the fear, it doesn't happen to anyone. It's called fearlessness. Doesn't mean fear doesn't come and go. Everything starts coming and go. Once this disappears into no one in particular, then everything starts to show up. Other people's emotions and hopes and fears and things show up in your consciousness, and you don't mind. More? Choo-choo.
When we notice an urge to talk at someone, we don't really care what their feedback is. Is there anything to do before we start talking?
If you're aware that you're doing that, then more than likely it isn't going to get a lot of momentum. And if the awareness is with that, this is why it's so important to train the mind so that when any of us do go into some kind of low-level skirmishes or warfare about this or that, or being up and unhappy about what another person is doing, our partner or anyone, then there's awareness comes along with it. And at some point or points, or maybe it's not even a point, the awareness starts to bleed out in front of the thought process, and we start to actually lead with our awareness rather than the crazy ego mind that's always looking for protection and results and acceptance and appreciation and not wanting to be dissed. That's why I'm here to diss you at the appropriate time. I sometimes forget I'm supposed to do that, so therefore I end up being really nice.
If someone is talking at us, how can we receive what they're saying if there's our own judgments going on about that person?
Just all those things get along fine. Just the mind that differentiates between good and evil, up and down, back and forth, or that gets tied up in having preferences. Sutras thousands of years ago say picking and choosing is the disease of the mind. But wanting this over that that's the main disease. It's not that you couldn't prefer something over something else. It's the kind of militant attitude that comes in there, like you deserve this should happen, you should get your way. So what I would say is when you notice that you're doing that, you're you can be responsible for what's happening. In other words, just be aware of what's happening rather than intercept it to try to get to a higher level of not being that kind of person, which is highly polished narcissism. Rather than you can have a little bit of what's the common word there, humility, and just be a shithead. You follow me? Don't follow me too far. In other words, I'm not saying do it as a deliberate kind of experiment, but if you notice that coming up, before you intercept it and clean up your act, first notice the rough and raw quality of that emotion going out towards another person who probably doesn't need that kind of situation hitting their nerve endings, in particular their mind. Go ahead.
Does our own negativity that's arising get in the way of receiving the other person?
Not if you include it, not if you're aware of it. Awareness is royalty. Awareness is a queen. More.
Is the misunderstanding that I'm expecting to feel like I'm receiving?
Probably. Pretty close. Yeah. Anything else? It's good. Keep going. Take us down that rabbit hole. I like that question. Train your mind. Sit down, hold still. Look at anything that continues moving after you work with the body in such a way that hold it very still. And it's not going to happen in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years. It's going to take probably your life. It takes a long time. I'm not saying there aren't spontaneous awakenings that people have. Usually if they're claiming them, then they probably aren't all that thorough.
If there's a realization that someone is talking at someone, or for example, if I'm talking at someone, is there a value in just completely dropping that?
I think so. But in completely dropping it, it should just terminate because of the power of the presence or the pure appearance, the genuine presence of just being here, just here. You don't need to be validated by anyone or anything. Who you actually are is covered up by this crazy world of cause and effect and success and failure, the 8 worldly dharmas. But you're flashing into that all the time. Just don't maintain it. When it opens up, it's just opening up. If it closes down, so as the metaphor that's used quite often in the Zen tradition is sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced. There isn't anything but Buddha. We're not talking about the Shakyamuni Buddha who lived 2,500 years ago. He was the one that understood this and told a few people about it. So it's always the case. Nothing sleeps anywhere. There's nothing asleep. But there's a kind of a cover-up based on fear, based on hope, based on feeling threatened, based on fear. And this is, you know what this one is. I don't have to come up with a word. More?
Is there a way to come out of here more often? It feels like we're kind of constantly going back and forth.
Fear will tell you. Being afraid is don't cover up the fear, don't run away from it. And also don't join it. Don't try to crank it up. Don't do anything with it. Just everything should be on receive. In the sitting practice, just to give everything your attention. I often refer to that as a complete generosity. If you want to give, then give everything your attention. Start with that. Because if you give everything your attention, then the attention and the reception are not two different things. And don't come to a conclusion about it, because then you've just shut down the whole, what do they call that, contraption. Turned away from it more. Not two different things. You can't find two different things anywhere. Anytime you find one thing, You find its opposite. If you don't find the opposite, then take a nap. Further questions? Sokuzan.
Can we be excluded?
Pardon me?
Can we be excluded?
What's your context?
Social situations?
Yeah. But it doesn't mean much other than you may have some negative feelings or hurt feelings over it, if that's what you mean. But those, if you're on this path, then those are part of the path. Negative feelings are not to be accepted, rejected, or ignored. Do nothing with them. If you jump away from the negative feeling into the cause, you've just bought into what is called samsara, or the world of life and death, up and down, back and forth, right and wrong, life and death. Buddhas and sentient beings. You don't need to do that. You can actually just receive. Just be genuine. Be the very negativity you're experiencing. So it won't kill you, and it won't last. As the Buddha said 2,500 years ago, the 3 marks of existence. All compounded things will vanish. Everything is in a state of discontent. I don't know if he said state, but everything is suffering. And there is no solid being who is experiencing any of this. There's no solid self in the skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness. Just to realize those 3 deeply is realization. Just another way of talking about it. Further questions? Lisa, kind of.
What does it mean that suffering is always the case? Like if someone's relatively happy, how's their
No, that's ignorance. It's a form of it. It doesn't mean they aren't enjoying themselves or having a good time, or they never have any illness, and they were born into a wonderful, happy, supportive family situation. Happens quite a bit, not always, but quite a bit. So the downside of it is not much chance that they're going to have a spiritual path. They could have, because everything's going too well. So the downside is, well, let's start with the upside. The upside is feel pretty good. Things are good. Have 2 Harleys, Mercedes. I got rid of the Mercedes, and I got a couple of Jaguars. Seemed just fine. Not the animal, but the car. Seemed to work just fine. I feel a lot better with it. The neighbor, he's got a Buick. So the idea with the suffering is if one is aware of what this body-mind complex actually is, then the suffering is there all the time, because we are not separate from each other. You may eventually get rid of, as it says in the first turning of the Buddha's teaching, you may cut back on the self-centered suffering, your own suffering. But the Mahayana path is not about that. It's not about a self-styled enlightenment of the Pratyeka Buddha. It is the enlightenment of the Bodhisattva, who never really gets enlightened because he, she, they are too busy helping others. Save all beings. And this means there are no beings to save, but meet everyone and everything where they're at. If they think they're a being, then treat them like a being. Have respect for their idea of boundaries. More? Anyone else? Nobody wants to know anything. Since you.
When you say that you don't see anything else, what do you mean by nothing else?
I don't see other stuff. This is my altar. That's my window. This is my ball of yellow things. Mine. With, in the company of a blue thing. It's mine. Want me to go further? As I get this to stand up, I will. These are my Buddhas. This is the Buddha. Everywhere I look, I see the Buddha.
What do you mean then saying that it's your window and your Buddha's?
Everything belongs to me. I'm thinking in particular of gravel out in the parking lot. So the whole idea of boundary in this situation, when consciousness begins to show up in that way, that everything is perception only. So there's no perceiver, no objectivity, and there's nothing perceived. So there isn't anything but this. And this is where the everything is empty of other. So there's no otherness to anything anymore. It's still there, and it's brilliant. It's sometimes called luminous, which doesn't mean it's particularly sending out rays of light. It's vividly clear, and it's in what is sometimes I talk about a minute or a second or a microsecond has dimensions, but a moment doesn't have dimensions. Because you say, well, how long is a moment? That's a rhetorical question. So, Munya, would you like to answer that rhetorical question? No. Further questions? Have a minute or so. Kiyun.
When we're talking at, what ceases?
Your awareness, it shuts down because you're just producing. There's reception and there's production. The practice needs to be as much reception as possible. Receive the confusion you've been trying to avoid, either here, there, out there. Receive. Not easy because it can get very threatening, especially if you're in a situation, your karma's taken you into a situation that's threatening. So it's when that happens, then just feel the threat rather than cover it up. You don't have to suddenly be a person who receives. The idea of the practice is receive. And then when you see you can't receive, be aware of that because you're looking right at your self-centeredness, your ego, the very structure of your seventh consciousness, the self-love, self-pride, self-reference. And I never can remember the third one or the fourth one. You know what it is? Self-pomposity. Yeah, that one. It's just the nature of consciousness because of fear, because of hope, to congeal into some kind of a being who enlists the aid of everything else to promote itself or herself, himself, whatever, or control. If you can just get control of other people. We all have a parent. It's probably pretty apparent that you have a parent who wants to control you. And they may do it just a little bit, like eat your spinach. Or it may be something like, well, I'm not going to say that. But there's some kind of people get, because of relativity, people get their temporary security from getting someone else to do what they want. And they can also get it from being upset with somebody who will not do what they're told. Very similar. It's just they won't do what I tell them to, or else they always do what I want. They always comply. So any kind of polarity, we're like little vampires. We suck the blood out of that polarity and continue our life on stage.
Is there any sort of talking that's not talking at?
Probably not. But it's always about awareness. It's always about awareness. It's not about getting somewhere. People teach this differently in different places. I teach out of what I see. I don't teach out of what I was taught. What I was taught was someone came on and stuck my head in the flower pot. And it's like, they didn't say this, but it's like, see for yourself. You find out. And no one was telling me, believe this, don't do this, do that, other than train your mind. So that's why I'm saying to you, find out yourself. You find out. There's nothing to believe here at all. One final question. Sure.
To Keegan's question, you seem to put reception and production as opposites.
Mhm.
Is there any situation where those can happen at the same time?
They're always happening at the same time. But you have to be aware of that. If you're not aware, then you'll be selective. So they're always, it's like everything is happening at once. Time is an illusion. Don't believe a word I say. Find out. Space is an illusion. It's kind of like when you see, it's like, this is like a dream, but it's a real dream. So therefore it's convincing. But yes, production, reception are, you can't have one without the other. But the recommendation is just receive. Don't produce unless it comes out of the awareness where you have to do it. You have to say something. And then let it rip. It's called non-duality. It's the fancy word, Advaita. Not two. Also not one. That's a misunderstanding. Even the not two is a via negativa. It's a way of talking about it that isn't exactly right, but it will actually, if you use that, it will kick your butt enough that you probably won't miss the clouds for the sky. Further questions? Thank you very much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our chant books. So I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway. We always appreciate and depend on your financial support. Please help us as you are able. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Shi-ho-san, shi-fu, shi-song-gu-sa-mo-ko-sa, the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.